Hello FlossTube and welcome back. This is the 7th part of my celebration of colour stitch along video series. You will find the charts on the link down below in the drop down box, and if you follow me on Instagram, Ros Clark Craft, you'll also find them from the link in my bio over there. We are on part 7, as I say, which means we are on yellow green. This is what mine is looking like. I haven't got anything to put behind it. I think you can just about see it all right. I'm filming this in the evening. The lighting is rubbish. I'm trying to get ahead. Well, I am slightly ahead because I know the weekend this comes out, I will have absolutely no opportunity for filming at all. And I'm also going to try and get the one after that done because I'm not sure I will have the capacity for any kind of filming that weekend. So I am trying to get ahead. I know the yellow video will have been out obviously by this. When I filmed that, I didn't have people's answers to the question in the previous video. So I just want to say a belated congratulations to those of you who worked out that it was brown. That is not on the colour wheel. Obviously you can have brownish tones, and that's sort of what I'm doing in this version. They are what I call slightly off tones, some more than others, but the way that you get those is by adding in a dash of the opposite colour, and we now have some opposite colours. So in this part, this strip here of the chart, where we've been doing little boxes and little fill-ins, we're now seeing the fill-ins and the boxes coming together. So you've got one that's got yellow green with red purple in it, and one that's red purple with yellow green in it. And all of these are going to pair up to be what are called complementary colours on the opposite side of the wheel. And so that's a way of seeing how they contrast. And you've got them with each colour being the dominant or the non-dominant colour in that pairing. You'll also see we've now only got one little tiny box down here with nothing in it. Obviously the one next to it, you've not got a huge amount of indication what's coming in there. Beg your pardon, there's another little tiny box over here. 2 little tiny boxes that we haven't used at all. We've got 5 more colours to come after this, so obviously it will get filled up over time. A lot of it, by this stage, hopefully you can see how it's coming together. There are some places where we are working systematically through the colour wheel, obviously in this colour wheel itself, but 1 or 2 others. Some places where we're working through the colour wheel here, but we're not using every colour. And some places where we are choosing randomly, not quite randomly, I did think about it, but you know, it feels kind of random in that I don't think you can predict what colours I'm going to put where in some of the other boxes. And so just have a look at it. Somi Sarah, I think, who commented that it felt like it was going to change significantly when we put the green in. And I do think that's right. You know, you could have started, I could have chosen to start, you couldn't, but I could have started anywhere on the colour wheel and worked around. And you still have this sort of effect, because what's happening here, well, we just about started with red purple, which has a slightly bluish tone to it. But now that we're coming back into green, yellow green, and then we'll come around to green and blue green, this side of the colour wheel will all have some bluish tone to it. And we've hardly had any bluish tone at all so far. And so I do think that has quite an impact. And I'll put here the photo from the model stitch that I did, which has the much kind of brighter primary kind of colours on it. And I think you'll see again how much difference it makes when we start introducing the green tone. So I hope you enjoy doing that bit of stitching. With the yellow green, we're also adding in all of the red and red purple that we haven't previously done. There was a set of 2 stitches somewhere that apparently I have missed out in the pattern. Anyway, 2 stitches are always red and 4 stitches are always red purple. So hopefully you can work that out. one stitch. There are some that are charted in red purple, but most of them are going to be in the colour that we haven't yet used. So yeah, 2 stitches red, 4 stitches red purple, if there are some that in whatever version of the chart you've got don't seem to have been charted. So it's really filling up. We have got 5 colours to do. We've obviously, there is some more black in there, but there is no more yellow. There's no more red. There's no more red purple. There's one of those colours where we're going to fill in the last remaining gaps in the frame. But as I say, other than the black, most of which I think you can tell where it's going to be, but there's one place that is not yet obvious. We're just going to be filling in each colour as we go. So it will be just a few hundred stitches, like maybe 300 stitches, something like that, 300 or 400 stitches every week from now on. And we are now well over halfway through in time, halfway through the number of parts, but also therefore well over halfway, maybe 2/3 of the way, I think, in terms of the stitching. So well done if you are keeping up. If you're just starting, it's a really fun stitch. Hopefully by now you should be able to download. All the versions that you'll download will be correct, and will build appropriately from part to part. I had some issues at the beginning trying to work out which sections of the chart should be greyed out because they'd already been stitched and which shouldn't. And yeah, I found that a whole lot more complicated than it really needed to be. But I think between us, we got it all sorted out. So if you're starting now, you should be able to get all the charts correct. So that's yellow green. So I wanted to start talking about, this is not going to be the last thing that I have to say about this, but I'm just going to move you slightly. I want to start talking a little bit more about colour substitution, but I wanted to start, we've used this book before, Joseph Alper's Interaction of Colour. One of the things that he says on the first page, oh, now I've completely lost it. I thought it was on the first page, and now oh, maybe it's in the forward. Introduction, here we go. Here's what he says. In order to use colour effectively, it is necessary to recognise that colour deceives continually. In order to use colour effectively, it is necessary to recognise that colour deceives continually. He goes on to say, in visual perception, a colour is almost never seen as it really is, as it physically is. That is to say, as the wavelength of its light would indicate. Colour is relative. Colour effects are produced as we recognise the way colours interact. And we've seen that. I hope you've seen that if you watched the yellow-orange video where I was talking about Bridget Riley, and she does this extraordinary. And I think you really could see it even on the video. You could see many, many colours that then when I gave you the close-up of the image, you could see actually there's only 4 colours plus black and white. And again, somebody commented, I saw loads of colours. I didn't even see black and white. You know, so colour is not a sort of concrete phenomenon. Now, I do think there's something about cross-stitch, or indeed any kind of textile art, that because of its physicality, its texture and its depth, helps our eyes to process it in a more literal way. So Bridget Riley, for example, her paintings are, you know, very flat colour, and that's really important. So your eye isn't seeing sort of shadows or highlights or shapes within that particularly. It's seeing, or, you know, figurative shapes within that. It's very geometric. And I think that's part of what is tricking the eye into processing the light differently. But even within our stitching, we will know, and I had a really good example of this just yesterday as I was stitching something. I'm like, oh, okay, that's not the colour I thought it was. So I'm going to start with that. And then I'm going to just talk through this time some examples of colour substitution where I think I've done it and it's worked really well, and also where I think I've done it and it's worked really badly. I've got, yeah, at least one, which I did redo, but I can explain and you'll be able to see what it was. So the one I'm going to start with is, let me get the skein. So one of the ways that colour deceives is colours look really different when they're in blocks as to when they're in very small amounts, so strands of floss. So this is beautiful floss. This was in the Roxy Floss Co. Evertote Modern Frolic Embroidery Holiday Countdown box that I had before Christmas. It's a beautiful colour. I'm sorry the light is rubbish. You may not be able to see it all that well. Just have a look at it. I'll tell you in a minute which colour it is. What colour family would you say that is in? Is it, you know, is it an orange? Is it a red? I know it's really difficult to see in this light on the camera. Let me try holding it all together a bit. There we go. Okay, that's about how I see it in real life. There's a few more shadows in there, so it's probably a little bit lighter. Anyway, I unboxed this and I was like, oh, that's a nice brown. I mean, it's a slightly muted kind of brown on the sort of pinkish end, but I'm like, it's definitely a brown. So I was really surprised when Caroline was doing her video, and she did one every day, sort of introducing the new colour of that day. And you know how Roxy Floss Co. skeins always have their colours, always have these great names. And this one is called The Occasion. She's like, isn't that a great pun? And I'm like, I don't get it. Because it's a rosy pink, rose to the occasion. And I'm like, it's really not. You know, I really was seeing that and just seeing basically a brown. I'm like, if my roses were that colour, I would think they were dead. It's more or less the thought process that I had. So I want to show you, this is where it is. So this is the holiday countdown piece, and I stitched mine putting the colours in all sorts of different places. But the occasion, it's this bit here. I can't remember if it's that bit at the bottom as well, it might be. But it's this stem and those leaves, and I think it's also this little bit at the top of that fleur-de-lis. Now, what do you think? I still think it's quite brownish. I really do. Particularly where it's, I think it's not the stem, that's right, it's the leaves on that tree. It's not the stem, it's those leaves and it's that. But when you put it in the middle here, it's the outline of the heart. And suddenly I'm like, oh, okay, that is quite pink. Interesting. And I've been stitching the sort of Valentine's stitch along piece with Love using my leftovers of that floss. So it's completely different to the colours this is charted in. And I just stitched a couple of days ago that big flower in the middle, this pink flower in the middle. And I was like, I don't know if I want to use the occasion. It's just not very pink. But I'm like, oh, I don't really know. I don't know what else there is to use. So I did it. And obviously it's got the paler pink around it. And it's not showing well on the screen. If I hold it about there, it looks all rightish. But I was like, oh, no, it really is just pink. Who would have thought? And it looks so different to me stitched there than it does in this game. But I promise you, that is the same colour. This thread and those dots in this flower. Colour is deceptive. Colour is deceptive. And I think that's the big problem that we have when we're making colour substitutions among, well, there are many problems we have, but one of the problems we have is that it's very difficult to know what a colour in a skein, or particularly actually on a bobbin, where you've got a big block of colour, you see it's so brown, is going to look like when we stitch it, partly because of the colours that it is next. I mean, you just would not believe that was like, I wouldn't anyway. It absolutely is. It's not the colour of these. That's a much darker floss that I've used down there. That's rosewood, if you've got this box. So that's a problem, the colours that it's next to, but also when you take one strand of floss and put it against your fabric, I mean, you're not going to be able to see anything useful here, but you know this is it. The impact of the fabric colour on that floss is huge. So on this, it definitely, this fabric colour meets everything there. And that's why, you know, people are stitching and they want a very primitive kind of shade, they'll choose that sort of very faded brownish kind of colour. I mean, you can't quite see on that, but like I've just happened to have this yellow fabric around that I'm stitching something else at the moment. And I mean, it really doesn't bring out any pink in the floss at all. I'm sorry, this lighting is so rubbish. You can't see it. But anyway, go and try it yourself. Take a skein of floss in a sort of off colour. So not an obviously, you know, bright red or blue or whatever. You know, we're not looking for a primary colour. Something that's, you know, hand-dyed maybe and sort of an in-between colour. And just look at it. Look at it as a whole skein, but also look at it as an individual floss or 2 strands of floss on a colour, and see how different it can look depending on the background that it's got. And that is one of the huge problems with trying to do colour substitutions, is trying to predict what the impact will be of putting a colour against a different background. So that is one thing. And yeah, in general, the substitutions for this were very easy, because I was just like, well, I'm just going to use the flosses from the Holiday Countdown. They were dyed to go together. It's the same fabric as the Holiday Countdown one. Basically, wherever I put them, it'll be fine. And I'm really happy with how that is indeed coming out. Let me show you an example of one that didn't go so well, and I'll explain why. So I think I'll try and use this as a background to hold this piece on. So this is Sting Like a Bee, which I think this is the Heartstring Samplery part of the Sting Like a Bee, Float Like a Butterfly collaboration. It was a bit heavy for this. Anyway, I think we can do it. Now, I did a complete colour conversion because I didn't want to buy new threads for this. I'm like, I'm sure I have plenty that I can stitch it with. And I'm really happy with how the final piece has come out. But there was one part that I did restitch because initially it didn't work at all. So let me show you. These are the bees. And the original colour for the bees was a sort of quite a... I should have brought the chart. Maybe I'll put a picture of the chart up as well so you can see it. But it was a much more muted colour, kind of brownish sort of colour. I'm like, no, I want my bees to be a nice bright yellowy colour. So I chose a colour and I started stitching the hive at the bottom. And one of the things I had not thought about when I was choosing my colour substitution was that the same yellow was used for the bees and the hive. And that worked perfectly well when the colour was that sort of darker yellowy browny colour. It did not work well when this was a bright pastel yellow here. It just looks silly on the hive. And that's the thing I do want to say, when you're making colour substitutions, you can use more colours, the same number of colours or fewer colours than in the original design. So in the with Love Chart, this is charted for 3 colours and I'm using about 21. I can't remember how many this is charted for, maybe 7. And I used 8. And that's fine. Sometimes you can use fewer colours. You could just say, do you know what? All of those pinks, all of those greens, I'm sure there's 2 greens in here, they could just all be the same. Particularly if you wanted to say, do you know what? I've got a variegated green. I'm just going to use that, and all the leaves can be stitched in that same floss. You know, you can do, it's your stitching. You can do what you like. Now, I know there are people, and I totally get this, who say, well, but the reason I want to stitch it is because I love how it looks in the model on the chart. And so what I want to do is get something as close as possible to that. And I get it. You know, sometimes I feel like that too. But sometimes I feel like that too. But there is a problem, isn't there? You can't always do that. You can't always get the same fabric, particularly if it's hand dyed. You can't always get the same floss if it's not available in this country, for example. Or you might get it, but it'll end up being a different dye lot and actually have quite a different feel to it. And so when you put your threads against it, you're like, oh, I don't know if that really does work. Sometimes there might not be enough contrast with the lot that you've got. Or sometimes, you know, it just doesn't look in real life quite like it did in the photo. I can't remember which chart it is, but there's one that I know somebody I'm watching on FlossTube is stitching, and the call for colours look really different from the photo. And I think it was poor photography, but the person who's stitching is like, but that's what I really liked. I liked the colours on the photo. What are you going to do? So there, you know, there just are times where you're going to have to make substitutions. So one of the things, this is my top tip number one, when you think about colour substitutions, make sure you check the chart to see exactly where the colours are used. I didn't, so I just assumed that this yellow was for the bees, and I hadn't realised it was also the colour for the hive. And then when I started stitching, I'm like, oh, well, this is the colour I've chosen for that, so I'll just do it. And I'm like, it really doesn't work. So what worked much better for me was to choose two different colours. I mean, probably I could have stitched the bees in this colour as well, but I'd chosen that colour and I wanted to use it. And I like how it looks. So, you know, just choosing a different colour for the hive worked really well for me. So check your chart so you know where the colours are going. They may not always be, and again, partly because colour deceptive, it may not be always obvious from the photo where all of the colours are actually used. Here's a thing that I did a colour conversion for that I absolutely love. I did take quite a long time trying to work out how to do the colour conversion for this, but I really love how it turned out. Right, have I spilled something on it? No, that is where it was meant to be. So this is Jack Rabbit from Cottage Garden Samplings. Obviously, there's a whole lot of other stuff charted around it that I decided I didn't want to do. I wanted to just do the hair. And in the chart, he's charted with kind of almost like a steel blue grey kind of tone. I'll put the picture up here. I had a paper chart of this and it got pretty much destroyed through my stitching of it. That's one reason why I don't pass stuff. Mostly it's because I only use PDF patterns, which is partly because my physical charts get destroyed. Anyway, so that's what he should look like. And this is what I wanted mine to look like. And so this did take a while. And partly, again, that was trying to work out where all the different colours were used. So this kind of pinkish brown with the darker brown patterning on it, that was kind of where I started because I knew I wanted that kind of warm feel to it. So then we added the kind of paler colours and the dark shadowy colours. The one that is really standing out on camera, but I promise looks absolutely beautiful in real life, is the kind of orangey tone inside the ears, and also this orangey tone here. And it was slightly tricky trying to work out what tone to go for there. And actually, I am happy with it. Although, as I say, I don't think it's looking brilliant on the camera. I think it is standing out quite weirdly, particularly this one here. So there, what I'm trying to do is work out not only my overall kind of colours that I want a warm brown, pinky brown kind of colour. I think maybe a slightly more natural colour for a hair than the bluish grey. Certainly the ones we have in the UK, I don't know about in America. But I also then need to think about contrast. So between this pinkish brown and the one with the pattern on it, there needs to be sufficient contrast. And this is where I come to tip number 2. When you are choosing colours that you need to contrast, whether that's 2 shades of floss or the floss with the fabric, I think you really need them to contrast on at least 2 axes. So what do I mean by that? So one of those axes is light and dark. Okay, you can have 2 colours that are basically in the same place on the colour wheel. One is very pale, one is very dark. You'll get a contrast. If they're not really separated, you won't get nearly as much contrast as you think. You'll see the contrast in the skeins or when you do your floss toss, but actually once you start stitching, if that's the only contrast there is, it really needs to be extreme for you to see that clearly. So what else could you contrast by? Well, obviously you contrast by colour. And when you'll contrast by colour, honestly, here we are. What you want is something that's opposite on the colour wheel. So you want red purple with yellow green, or you want orange with blue. It's not going to be nearly as much contrast. Like on here, you think, oh, actually, there's quite a contrast between that orange and the yellow. Yeah, there'll be a lot less once you start stitching with it. And again, if that's your only contrast from an orange to a yellow, you won't see it nearly as much as you think. Now, if you had a very dark orange with a very pale yellow, you've got two axes of contrast, the colour and the light and dark. That might work. The third way that you can contrast, and I haven't really got a good example to show you right now, is by saturation. So if you have one colour that's very muted, heading towards a greyish tone, and one that's very vibrant with no grey in it at all, that will also add contrast. So a very pale bluish grey with a much darker vivid blue, you'll get a much better contrast than if you have a pale clear blue with the darker blue. So those three axes, three, not four, three, colour, light, brightness, darkness, saturation, greyishness, vividness. You want to really, if you really want a strong contrast, you want to have at least two of those be different. The most difference in terms of colour, you'll get opposite on the colour wheel. Most difference in terms of dark and light, obviously very pale, very dark. Most difference in terms of greyishness or vibrancy. The terminology, yeah, is used in different ways in different places. That's all I will say about that. But that's a good way, good rule of thumb. So here, I didn't really want anything that was very different in terms of light and dark. There is a difference in the colour wheel, but also that pinkish brown is much greyer. And I didn't want this to be the sharpest contrast in the world. You know, it needs to sort of fit together, but you can certainly see the pattern. Yeah, and so this pinkish brown, like I say, is very muted, very greyed. And that's partly why actually this orange colour is picking up so strongly on the camera. It is, they do work together much better, but on the camera, this pale brown in here is looking incredibly desaturated, while the orange is looking a lot more saturated for some reason. So think about contrast, think about placement, think about contrast. One more piece that I brought out that I wanted to show you where I did a full colour conversion. So this is Hello from Liz Mathews, Berry Patch. Berry Patch? Bunny Patch? I think it's Berry Patch. Let me just put the chart here for you. Again, I did a PDF, so I haven't got the paper chart to show you. That's how she charted it. Spot the difference. Okay, so there are a lot of differences here. I more or less recharted it because I wanted to make it fit into a hoop rather than be a square finish. But you can see all the elements are there, the hive, the bunny, the berries, this sort of bordery bit with the daffodils. Just a reminder, this is hers. This is mine. So I did this around this time last year. Mariam from Marina Crafts did a sort of birthday challenge, wildcard birthday sal, which was to take something, a floss or a fabric that was way out of, well, I sort of interpreted it as way out of what the pattern called for. But I think you could also have gone way out of your comfort zone. It's not really out of my comfort zone. I really love this. But I had this piece of fabric, this sort of, I think it was called Citrus Burst. It's kind of yellowy, greeny, really bright, really beautiful, that I'd bought from Cross Stitch Bunny at Stitch in London. And I knew that I wanted to use that for the wildcard birthday sal. Sorry, I'm just doing it because I need to re-glue a bit of this pom-pom trim. Just ignore that. So I picked this, and then I looked through the charts that I had, and I was like, I know that'll be fabulous with the berry patch. And I wanted to do a pink rabbit. I don't know if any of you remember reading the book When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr. It was something I read as a child, and I still think it's beautiful as a way of understanding how some of what was going on then was viewed by children caught up in it. Anyway, but I always have liked pink rabbit. So I'm like, right, I'm going to do pink rabbit. So pink and lime green, where have we heard that before? Well, pink, particularly this kind of red purplish pink, you know, that's not on the coral end of the spectrum. That's definitely, particularly when I put these purpley bits, giving it some shading. That contrasts with lime green, doesn't it? Yellow green. We just got to that part on our colour wheel. So I thought that will be good. That'll stand out really well. I want obviously a nice bright red for the strawberries, oranges for the hive, and then I just picked, you know, greens and bright colours. And what I wanted to try and do with this, and I think I more or less succeeded, other than the very pale pink, I say the very pale pink, the paler pink, which is inside the ears and in one or two other places on this butterfly. Sorry, I wanted to aim for colours that all had the same sort of vibrancy. There's no greyish tones in this at all, and I wanted colours that you know, were sort of all bright, rather than being kind of off tones. They haven't, you know, they're not muted, they're not brownish. Even the oranges are really not brownish oranges. I think there was a variegated floss in there that I really enjoyed using. I don't know if it's going to focus on that at all for you. It is, but it's going to wash it out. Anyway, I just wanted really, really bright colours. And because in a design like this, well, certainly by the time I've, you know, Bowdlerized it and mangled it and done my own thing with it, it's not aiming for any kind of figurative representation. You just go for whatever you like. And I really, really, really had fun stitching that. And it's in no way what was called for, but for me it captures everything I loved about the original pattern. I loved the strawberry vines and the bunny. I loved the bigger flowers. I just love the happy feel of it. And to me, happiness is bright colours. It just is. So that's how I wanted to stitch it. Putting a whole colour palette together is obviously a lot harder than if you're making a substitution just for a sort of monochromatic piece or something with just 2 or 3 colours, where you can more or less, you know, pick anything you like and it'll be fine, so long as you've got enough contrast. You know, for something like this, I think it would have been possible to choose a colour that just didn't work with the rest of it, that was too brownish or too muted or too dark even. There is a tiny little bit of black here, and there is this darker colour, which I sort of interpreted as like berries. I mean, you know, not the strawberries, but some kind of little berry. I don't know. I'm fine with that. And I think that's the other thing, and this is where I'm kind of going to end for today. I already mentioned this a little bit earlier, but one of the things that will make a really big difference to the impact of the colours that you're choosing is the way in which they are used. So for example, this big, you know, the big thing in here is the bunny, and then after that the hive. If I'd used a really dark colour for the hive or for the bunny, that would have had a very different impact from using it on these little things. I think they only had 3 stitches, yeah. 3 stitches in a little sort of corner shape. Even these strawberries, you know, there's a lot of the red and they're in quite big chunks. So that has quite a big impact on the feel of the piece in a way that these little tiny berry things don't. So the things that go all over, in this case the vine and the strawberries, will set the tone of the piece. The things that are in big chunks will have disproportionate impact, and your eye will be drawn to them. And in some pieces, that's exactly what you want. You want to really be focused on one thing and everything else to feel like it's just in the background. But here I wanted it to feel like it was all part of the same scene. And so you know, these colours need to hold their own. The oranges in particular are more or less only used here. I think there might be, I might have put little bits in the birds and things. The pinks are used in other places, but in much smaller things, in these little doodads. So you've got the big chunk of pink and the big chunk of orange. you've got the all over things, the red and the green, these yellow flowers, and then everything else, the birds, the butterflies, the little sort of funny doodads, need to sort of fit in with that or form a background to that. So I could have done all of those in a slightly paler colour or a slightly greyer tones, and they would have immediately taken a step back. But by choosing the colours in the way that I have, it makes a sort of uniform whole. It's a whole picture together. So big chunks have much more of an impact than tiny dots, even if the same number of stitches are used all together. Putting them together has much more of an impact. And again, you know, something that's being stitched 2 over 2 rather than 1 over 1, 1 over 2, you know, depending on your stitch count and gauge, whatever. The 2 strands will give something much more vibrancy and much more impact, and therefore have more of an effect on your overall piece. So think about where you're stitching, think about how much contrast you want and how to achieve that, and think about how much the stitches are going to be clumped together and therefore what impact they will have on the piece as a whole. We're going to do some more on colour substitution in future videos, but I hope that's been helpful and interesting. Do leave any questions about colour substitution that you might have in the comments, and we'll see if we can get to those in a later video. Next time we'll be on to green, and I can't remember what I'm going to be talking about, but I hope you'll keep watching and keep stitching. See you next time.